It was a quiet afternoon when I decided to visit the swimming pool. The city felt unbearably heavy that day, full of noise, faces, and thoughts I didn't want to face. The water, I thought, might silence everything for a while. My life had become predictable: wake up, work, return home to a marriage that felt more like a habit than love. We spoke less, smiled even less. It wasn't anger between us, just distance, like two people living parallel lives under the same roof. I didn't go to the pool looking for anything, only peace. The air around the pool was warm and smelled faintly of chlorine. I slipped into the water, feeling it cool against my skin, and for a few moments, everything was calm. Then, across the pool, I noticed him, a tall African man, his skin glistening under the afternoon light. He moved through the water with an ease that caught my attention. There was confidence in him, not arrogance but something quietly grounded. Our eyes met briefly before I looked away, pretending to focus on swimming. Yet, something about that first glance stayed with me. After a while, we found ourselves near the same corner of the pool. He smiled, the kind of warm smile that melts away awkwardness, and said, "You swim well." I laughed a little, surprised by his friendly tone. "Not really," I said. "Just trying to remember how." We both laughed, and the tension vanished instantly. He introduced himself: Daniel, visiting from another country for a few months, working nearby. There was something sincere about the way he spoke, as if he meant every word, as if conversation with a stranger still mattered. That we started talking, slowly at first, about simple things. The weather. The pool. The city. I told him how quiet it felt to swim. He said he liked how water made people forget who they were for a moment. That line stayed with me. Maybe he was right. In the water, we were just two people floating, without titles, without burdens. As time passed, I noticed how natural it felt to talk to him. He laughed easily, listened carefully, and had a calmness that pulled me in. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. We shared a few light jokes, splashing water at each other like children, and I caught myself smiling without effort. It was strange how comfortable it felt, like we had known each other far longer than the few minutes we'd spoken. The sun began to dip, casting golden reflections on the water's surface. Daniel swam to the edge and leaned against it, looking at me. "You come here often?" he asked. "Not really," I said, "but maybe I should." He chuckled softly and said, "Then I might see you again." His words sounded casual, but something in the tone felt different, gentle, almost inviting. When I left the pool that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but there was something there, something that filled a quiet part of me I didn't even know was empty. On the way home, I caught myself smiling again. It felt strange, almost guilty, but honest. For years, I had forgotten what it was like to feel connected, even in the smallest ways. That night, lying in bed beside my wife, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept drifting back to the pool, to Daniel's laughter, to the way his eyes seemed to hold no judgment. I told myself it was nothing, just a friendly encounter. But deep down, I knew it had stirred something. A feeling I hadn't felt in years: warmth, curiosity, and a quiet sense of peace. I closed my eyes and tried to push it away, but the image of calm blue water and a stranger's smile stayed with me, lingering softly like a memory that didn't want to fade. The next afternoon, I found myself walking back toward the swimming pool without even deciding to. It felt like my body moved before my thoughts could catch up. I told myself I just wanted to swim again, to clear my mind, but a part of me already knew that wasn't the truth. I wanted to see him. I wanted to feel that quiet ease again, the kind that had slipped into my heart without warning. When I reached the pool, Daniel was already there, sitting on the edge with his feet in the water. He looked up, smiled when he saw me, and waved as if he had been waiting. I tried to play it casual, greeting him with the same smile, but something inside me fluttered. We talked again, and this time, it wasn't small talk. He asked me how my day had been, if I slept well, if life at home was peaceful. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated before answering, "It's fine." He looked at me for a moment, as though he saw through the word. Then he nodded slowly, saying, "Sometimes, fine just means tired." We slipped into the water together. The sound of the pool, the laughter of children, the soft splashes around us, all faded into the background. He told me about his life back home, about growing up near the ocean, where the waves were stronger than here. There was something soothing about the way he spoke, as if every word came from a calm, deep place. I found myself opening up too, speaking of things I rarely said out loud. I told him I felt distant from everything lately, from my work, from my wife, from myself. He didn't interrupt or offer solutions. He just listened, and somehow, that was enough. After swimming, we sat by the poolside, water dripping down our arms. The evening sun stretched long shadows across the floor. Daniel looked thoughtful and said quietly, "It's strange how you can live with someone and still feel alone." His voice was gentle, not judging, just real. The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't reply, I just looked down at the water, its surface trembling with small ripples. Over the next few days, we kept meeting. Sometimes by chance, sometimes because one of us hinted we would be there. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He told me stories that made me laugh, stories that made me think. With him, there was no need to pretend, no fear of being misunderstood. One evening, we sat silently, watching the sunset reflect on the pool's surface, and he said, "When you stop fighting what you feel, life becomes lighter." Those words lingered in my head long after I went home. I began to notice how different I felt when I was around him. It wasn't only about attraction, it was something deeper, something that gave me a strange sense of peace. At home, though, things felt heavier. My wife noticed I was quieter, lost in thought, but she didn't ask. Maybe she already knew something had changed. That night, Daniel sent me a message, "You look distant today. Are you okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, just thinking too much. He responded, "Don't be afraid of your thoughts. They're only trying to show you who you really are." I didn't know what to say back. His words felt both comforting and terrifying. That I lay awake that night, thinking about him, about what all of this meant. Was it wrong to feel this connection? Was I betraying someone, or just finally being honest with myself? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that when I thought of him, the world felt quieter, easier, softer. I hadn't felt that kind of peace in years. The next time we met, I told him that being around him made me feel seen in a way I didn't understand. He smiled, then reached out and placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "You don't need to understand it," he said softly. "Just don't be ashamed of it." His hand stayed there for a moment, and in that silence, something inside me shifted, a calm acceptance, mixed with fear. I didn't know what this connection would lead to, but I knew it had already changed something deep within me.
It started subtly, almost in ways I could have ignored if I wanted to. The first sign came one afternoon when I went to return a book he had lent me. His front door was slightly open, and I could hear voices inside. I hesitated before knocking, but the tone of his laughter caught my attention. It was light, familiar, the same way he laughed when we spoke. Then I heard another voice, softer, a woman's voice. Something in me froze for no reason I could explain. I knocked gently, and the laughter stopped. A few seconds later, he opened the door, surprised to see me standing there. "Oh, hey," he said quickly. "I didn't hear you." His tone was calm, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. Behind him, I noticed someone moving in the living room. A glimpse of long hair, then the sound of a chair scraping. "You're busy," I said, forcing a small smile. "I just came to return your book." He took it from my hand, nodded, and said, "Thanks. Let's talk later." The door closed gently, leaving me outside with a strange, hollow feeling I didn't understand. That evening, I sat on my porch, trying to shake it off. Maybe it was nothing. He had every right to have friends, and I had no reason to feel the way I did. But still, something felt off. The warmth in our connection had changed recently. His messages came less often, his tone more distant. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe he was just busy, but the next few days made it impossible to ignore that he stopped stopping by altogether. I saw him once across the street, talking to the same woman I had glimpsed that day. They seemed close, almost comfortable. He laughed again, the same way he used to when we sat outside drinking tea. I tried to wave, but he didn't notice me. Or maybe he pretended not to. That moment stung more than I wanted to admit. I kept wondering if I had done something wrong, if I had said something that pushed him away. The silence grew heavier. Every night, I caught myself glancing at his window, waiting for the familiar glow of light that once felt like a sign of comfort. Now it was either dark or closed off, and it felt like I had lost something I couldn't name. Out a week later, I ran into a mutual acquaintance from the neighborhood. They mentioned casually that my neighbor had reconnected with his ex. Someone he had told me months ago had hurt him deeply. The words hit me harder than expected. It wasn't jealousy that I felt, but disappointment. The realization that many of the things he'd told me, the way he had opened up about being alone, might have been a story he used to fill the empty spaces in his life. That I try not to think badly of him. But the more I replayed our conversations, the more I noticed small cracks I hadn't seen before. The late night invitation, the way he looked at me like he needed saving, the sudden warmth that turned cold. It all started to make sense in a way I didn't want it to. I wasn't angry, just quietly hurt that a few days later I saw him again. He came over briefly, acting as though nothing had changed. "Hey," he said with that same polite smile. "It's been a while. How have you been?" His tone was casual, almost distant. I wanted to ask why he had disappeared, why things suddenly felt so empty between us. But instead, I just said, "I've been fine." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. There was so much I could have said, but I didn't. Maybe because I already knew the truth. He had moved on, not just from me, but from whatever connection we once had. I realized that night that sometimes betrayal doesn't come with lies or arguments. Sometimes it's just silence where words used to be, and indifference where warmth once lived. When he left, I stood by the window, watching his figure fade into the dim streetlight. I thought of all the nights we had sat talking about loneliness, trust, and kindness. Maybe he meant it then, or maybe it was just what he needed in that moment. Either way, it was over now. I turned off the light, sat in the dark for a long time, and let the truth settle quietly. He was never really mine to lose, but somehow it still felt like losing something real. Time has a way of softening the edges of things that once felt sharp. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly the ache of what happened began to fade into something quieter. I stopped waiting for his messages and no longer looked toward his window at night. Life moved forward, as it always does, even when you think it won't. I focused on work, spent more time with people I had neglected, and learned to enjoy my own company again. Yet sometimes, late at night, when everything went still, I found myself remembering that first evening, the knock on his door, the way his eyes had looked when he said he didn't want to be alone. It was strange how something that had started with such warmth could end in silence. That I saw him again one afternoon while walking home from the market. He was standing by his car, talking to someone, laughing easily. When his eyes met mine, there was a flicker of hesitation, as if he wasn't sure whether to smile or look away. Finally, he gave a small nod, polite but distant. I nodded back, and for a brief second, it felt like we were strangers again. That realization hurt more than I expected, but it also made me understand something. Not every connection is meant to last forever. Some people come into your life to teach you how to see yourself more clearly, even if they leave before you're ready. That evening, I sat outside watching the sunset fade into a dull orange glow. The air was quiet, but this time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. I thought about everything that had happened, the trust, the disappointment, the nights spent wondering what went wrong, and realized it had all been part of something larger. Maybe betrayal doesn't always mean cruelty. Sometimes it's just a reflection of human weakness. The way people stumble when they're trying to find their own peace. That I began to forgive him in small ways, not through words or apologies, but by letting go of the anger that no longer had a place in my heart. I reminded myself that I had done what I could. I had listened, cared, and offered kindness when it was needed. What he chose to do with that wasn't mine to control. Slowly, forgiveness became freedom. That a few weeks later, I heard that he had moved away. His house stood empty for a while, the garden unwatered, the curtains drawn. I thought I would feel sadness, but instead, I felt closure. The story that had begun with a late-night message had finally ended quietly, without drama, without bitterness. Just an understanding that sometimes people drift apart because they're meant to. Now, when I walk past that house, I don't feel the same ache anymore. I remember it as a chapter, one filled with warmth, confusion, and lessons I didn't know I needed. I learned that trust isn't about expecting others to stay. It's about believing in your own strength when they don't. Sometimes, we meet people who mirror the parts of us we're trying to understand. My neighbor was one of those people. He showed me both the beauty and fragility of connection. And though it ended in silence, it also left behind something precious, the quiet wisdom that comes after being hurt and still choosing to be kind. That night, I wrote a small line in my journal before going to bed. Not every story ends with love returned, but every story can end with peace. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and for the first time in a long while, I slept without thinking of what could have been. The past had finally let go, and so had I.